For many years, it's never sat well with me that Staying Alive has been so universally panned by critics and moviegoers, even being called the worst movie of all time on more than one occasion. According to Wikipedia, it is the oldest film to hold a score of 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the criteria being that a movie has to either have a minimum of 20 reviews or have a critic's consensus. Inchun from 1981, for example, which predates Staying Alive by a couple of years, also has a 0% score but with only 8 reviews. Therefore, it's excluded from making that list on Rotten Tomatoes. Staying Alive, as of today, has been reviewed by 27 film critics. Staying Alive was called the worst sequel in 2006 by Entertainment Weekly. I don't know. There are a ton of horrific sequels made over the years, and even if we just isolate 1983, The Sting 2 is generally considered awful, and it's not like the first Sting isn't any less of a classic than Saturday Night Fever is. It's not like we're comparing Chud, which I don't actually mind by the way, versus Chud 2, Bud the Chud. Staying Alive was nominated for 3 Golden Raspberry Awards on April 8, 1984. John Travolta for Worst Actor, Finola Hughes for Worst New Star, and also Finola Hughes for Worst Supporting Actress. Interestingly enough, despite all of its poor reviews it received back in the day, it wasn't up for Worst Picture, Worst Director, Worst Screenplay, or Worst Original Song that year. Classics such as Hercules, Jaws 3D, Stroker Ace, and the unforgettable Two of a Kind received 5 nominations each, with the Pièce de Résistance, The Lonely Lady, receiving 11. Since we're here, the movie with the most Razzie Awards of all time is Jack and Jill from 2011 with 10 Razzies, followed by Travolta's very own Battlefield Earth in 2000 with 9 of its own. Back to Staying Alive, it made Roger Ebert's list of most hated movies. Interestingly enough, Flashdance, like Staying Alive, also from 1983 and also with Cynthia Rhodes, also made Ebert's list. And here's another important tidbit taken from Ebert's July 15, 1983 written review of Staying Alive, a few months after his Chicago Sun-Times review of Flashdance. Like Flashdance, it isn't really a movie at all, but an endless series of musical interludes between dramatic scenes that aren't there. It's not even as good as Flashdance, but it may appeal to the same audience. It's a Walkman for the eyes. What did the critics and moviegoers in general like about Staying Alive? It's generally just one thing, and that's the ending when Travolta struts down Times Square, Manhattan to the Bee Gees song Staying Alive. Outside of that, I suppose some people seem to like the character Jackie, played by Cynthia Rhodes. Others don't mind the scene when Tony returns home in the middle of the night, and we're really wanting more of that throughout the movie. We get to see Tony crossing the bridge that we should recognize from Saturday Night Fever, then walking past the 2001 Odyssey, eventually winding up at his old home in Brooklyn, sharing a scene with his mother, Flo Manero, played by Julie Bavasso. Man, I wouldn't mind some of that 1983 apple pie. Wash it down with a tall glass of milk. I bet Mrs. Monero's a pretty good cook, save for her spaghetti sauce. It don't taste, and it don't drip. I think that there was enough of those 1977 pork chops to go around. I wouldn't mind trying some of that too. Just none of that spaghetti. I think Frank Monero Sr. gave enough of a fair warning not to try Flo spaghetti. I just hope he doesn't freak out if I ask for more than one pork chop. If he does, and I'm still hungry, maybe I'll go snag some wafers from Frank Jr.'s room. Now let's run through a number of specific reasons as to what critics and moviegoers dislike about Staying Alive. The idea of even making a sequel in the first place. With all the sequels coming out of the woodwork in the early 80s, especially in 83, and generally bad ones at that, I guess a follow-up to Saturday Night Fever was not exactly welcoming news, though I would have thought otherwise. They don't like how the movie doesn't have much of a connection to the original movie. Saturday Night Fever was more raw, gritty, and had a darker tone to it. It was more realistic by comparison. It had something to say that was bigger than the movie itself. Some didn't like that we heard nothing about Stephanie in Staying Alive, and if I can interject, I personally thought it would have been a nice touch for them not to have cut out the scene with Donna Pescow's character Annette. Apparently, she had made an appearance showing up at Tony's Broadway debut in Satan's Alley. They didn't like that Sylvester Stallone directed this movie, and I'll expand on this later on. Finola Hughes' character Laura, and Finola Hughes' performance, and Finola Hughes' dancing.
Every everybody uses everybody, don't they?
Critics calling her just a soap opera star, even though she wasn't on any daytime soap opera leading up to being a Staying Alive. In fact, she didn't start playing on General Hospital until 2 years later, in 1985. Everyone seems to hate the Broadway production of Satan's Alley, everything from its name, to the dance sequences, to the light show, not being able to properly label whether it's a musical without singing, or just some silly dance piece with zero story. They pretty much dislike everything about it. Though I'm sure some of these same critics just 2 years earlier likely went on and on about how excellent Cats was in 1981. They also didn't like that Sylvester Stallone's brother Frank had 8 songs compared to just 5 from the Bee Gees for the movie's soundtrack. Though I'm not exactly sure what they're complaining about because I thought everyone disliked the Bee Gees at this point in time. At any rate, a lot of criticism was directed at Stallone's perceived nepotism, ultimately going with his brother's song for the opening sequence of the movie. A number of reviews that I've come across also point out how they really dislike the film's soundtrack altogether, citing that it's dated or just lame. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the movie is that bad. On the other hand, I definitely think that there was more in play that helped push the critics in one direction back in '83, likely propelling them to hate Staying Alive before they even saw it. What were some of the potential reasons that hurt Staying Alive in '83? Travolta? The Bee Gees? Stallone? The critics, and where their heads were at in 1983. Let's start with Travolta. He was not exactly a hot property in '83. And if you think about it, almost all the younger stars from the '70s were ice cold by 1983. Everyone associated with Welcome Back Kotter, the Cassidys, the McNichols, the Osmonds, Rex Smith, Robbie Benson, Kim Richards, the younger cast of 8 is Enough not named Ralph Macchio, who had just done The Outsiders in '83, Ames and Baio, Baio hit by a cold deck with Joni Loves Chachi, Ames taking a chance card and going directly to jail with Paradise, and they weren't exactly white hot after doing Zap together, eventually winding up on Charles in Charge shortly after that, in hopes of trying to make a rebound of their own. I don't think any actor was more famous in the '70s than John Travolta, and that's including Farrah Fawcett and Burt Reynolds. Well, maybe Burt Reynolds was his equal and could have something to say about that, but by 1983, he was already into a deep funk of his own. Never mind the '70s, even A Flock of Seagulls, a very successful act and brand new to the music scene in '82, were already trending downward by mid-'83. Just think of people like actress Jill Clayburgh or singer Christopher Cross, and how they were the hottest thing since sliced bread, and then they quickly weren't. People felt that the publicity leading up to Staying Alive, Travolta posing on numerous magazine covers, was getting out of hand. With that, there was a specific 1983 Rolling Stone cover with a featured story on Travolta titled Sex and the Single Star that didn't do him any favors. I also wonder if that Rolling Stone article helped fuel him to do Perfect in 1985. One could argue that Travolta's image never fully recovered to what it once was in his Saturday Night Fever Grease heyday after the critical and financial failure of Moment by Moment in 1978. And this is despite making a bit of a rebound with quality films like Urban Cowboy in 1980 and Blowout in 1981. Travolta and the Bee Gees will always be linked together with disco, and naturally with this movie coming out in '83, there most certainly was going to be some backlash. Hating on disco was still very much a thing then. The Bee Gees. By the late 1970s, the Bee Gees were routinely surrounded by FBI and US Secret Service agents while on tour for their protection. Behind the scenes, they were still writing hits for other artists like Barbra Streisand, Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton, Dionne Warwick, and even for Leo Sayer. But they were sort of hidden from the public for the first half of the 1980s. Barry Gibb once stated, "I think John Travolta suffered more than we did. He's a fine actor and he doesn't get the parts he should get, and he's penalized for doing that film." And to be clear here, he's actually referring to Saturday Night Fever and not Staying Alive. Stallone. There seemed to be a lot of skepticism emerging, specifically amongst film critics, that maybe Stallone's early success was a bit of an aberration from who he really was as an artist. Upon the release of Rocky in 1976, Roger Ebert had stated that Stallone could become the next Marlon Brando. So the bar was set real high for Sylvester Stallone. Here's a clip of a review on Paradise Alley.
You know, this picture, he creates such a weird world, as you said. This Paradise Alley is a gambling den and a wrestling parlor underneath some building. Really exciting. We expect some weird kind of finish to the picture. No, cornball happy ending.
Right out of Rocky. Rocky ended with a big fist fight. This ends with a big wrestling match. Worked in Rocky. It doesn't work this time.
I think maybe Stallone has this idea that if you just give people a happy, big, exciting physical ending, that it's going to work all the time.
Well, the formula didn't work this time. It was a letdown.
Rocky III, though successful at the box office, had mixed reviews upon its release in 1982. And with that movie, we have yet again another happy ending. The critics. 1983 is generally regarded as one of the worst years for movies. That year was known for having a lot of sequels, as well as a lot of 3D movies, and with that, there were a number of historically bad movies in 1983. The newer style of films being released in the early 80s were a sharp contrast to the grittier, darker, socio-political movies of the 1970s. Based on those factors, I get the sense that the critics were getting sick of the newer adopted trends of filmmaking, and by 1983, they had reached their breaking point. Not just Siskel and Ebert, I mean all of the major critics of the day. With Staying Alive, we have another sequel coming out of the woodwork that stylistically and, in tone, differentiates itself from the original. I think that they had enough reasons to dislike Staying Alive before they sat down to watch it for the first time, and with that perhaps they wanted to make an example of it. Back in '79, at a charity benefit, Siskel outbid Jane Fonda on John Travolta's Saturday Night Fever suit, going for $2,000. Saturday Night Fever was Gene Siskel's favorite movie. Interestingly enough, Ebert recalled a conversation he had with Gene Siskel where he spoke about why Saturday Night Fever was such an important film. Although Saturday Night Fever appealed to him primarily on an emotional level, Siskel spoke about it in terms of its themes, and there are two central ones. First, the desire of all young people to escape from a life sentence of boring work and attain their version of the beckoning towers of Manhattan. Second, the difficulty that some men have in relating to women as comrades and friends, and not simply sex facilitators. Having read all of that, I don't think that Stallone completely missed the mark on making a projection of where Tony was heading in life. According to Stallone's vision of Staying Alive, and Travolta's as well, he wanted to show that Tony had moved away from Brooklyn to Manhattan. He wanted Tony to have a more enlightened view of women, which is why Tony ends up with Jackie. We don't see his old friends because we already knew that by the end of Saturday Night Fever, Tony was already moving on. He didn't like dancing, he loved it, which is why he was trying to make it on Broadway all those years later.
The thing is that I would like to get that high someplace else in my life, you know?
Like where?
I don't know where. I don't know. Someplace. You see, dancing, it can't last forever. It's a short-lived kind of thing.
I don't see what's wrong with Tony not finding that thing that gives him the same high that dancing gives him. And remember, this is 6 years later. Tony was 19 in Saturday Night Fever, so we're to assume that he should have everything figured out by 25? What were critics and moviegoers expecting? They wanted to see that Tony was still living in Brooklyn, maybe even with his parents still? We know literally everyone despised disco by '83. Did they want him to still be dancing at 2001 Odyssey to disco?
Actually, that could have been a really good movie.
Or how about Tony still working at the hardware store, maybe getting another raise, because who knows, maybe it's been 6 years now since he got his last raise. Now there's a story. Why do I like it? I liked it when I saw it in the theater when I was 8, and to this day, I romanticize my childhood experiences, so I have some bias here. Beyond that, I still liked it when it premiered on NBC in 1987, and I eventually caved in and bought it about 10 years ago on DVD and have watched it annually. And for whatever reason, even though I own it on DVD, I'll still occasionally watch it whenever it's on TV. Why do people do that? I appreciate that John Travolta even returned to do a sequel. There were sequels made around that time where the main actor from the original film was nowhere to be seen, like Richard Dreyfuss in Jaws 2. Roy Scheider was gone by the third installment. Just a cameo of Burt Reynolds in Smokey and the Bandit Part 3. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, without the original cast and without the central premise. The Sting 2, entirely original cast. Even Grease 2 was missing Travolta himself. I'm in the minority, I'm sure, because I find that Tony's personality and character isn't all that dissimilar to how he acted in Saturday Night Fever. Certainly he's going to grow up a bit in 6 years, and I believe he would have developed a thicker skin over that time. Some people see Travolta's performance as posturing or that he's too robotic. Maybe so, but Staying Alive illustrates to my liking that Tony was once a big fish in a small pond in Brooklyn in 1977, to a contrast of being nothing special in Manhattan in 83, at least for the first couple of acts of the movie. And specifically with John Travolta's performance here, I don't see it as being bad or deserving of a Razzie Award. I loved how Tony knew that he was getting favoritism in Saturday Night Fever, and he gave a similar look in Staying Alive when he was probably thinking to himself in both instances that I'm better than all of this. I think it's important to show that Tony is still fueled to be better than where he is in the moment. I also don't think that the movie has to fall under the category of it's so bad that it's good either. I think that's an excuse to save face or whatever. Look, I've watched Roadhouse I don't know how many times on TV, because it's on as often as any other movie that I can think of. I always think, hey, I'm not supposed to like Roadhouse, but I've always enjoyed Roadhouse. Is it flawed? I guess when you think about it, sure. I mean, why does Dalton have a Mercedes while Brad Wesley drives around in a Mustang? I mean, come on. And by the way, while we're here, I'm seriously doubting that rumor that Patrick Swayze played an extra in Staying Alive. Now, there are plenty of reasons to think that he could have been in it though. He was in the Toto video, Rosanna, with Cynthia Rhodes, and they would be in Dirty Dancing together a few years later. So there's a connection there. Patrick Swayze's mother Patsy, a longtime dance instructor, choreographed her first movie, Urban Cowboy, in 1980, which of course predates Staying Alive and yes, starred John Travolta. She's not listed in the credits for Staying Alive, though it seems to me that I once read on a message board that she had helped out in some way. I can't confirm that though. And that's not him, just look. Different eye color, bloated face. He was in The Outsiders and Uncommon Valor that year. Why would he want to be an extra here? While he wasn't exactly a household name, he'd already done Skate Town USA back in 1979. What nobody seems to mention was that Joyce Heiser from Just One of the Guys is here if you look quick enough. She is credited. I only recognize her because of her eyes. Now I wonder why she wasn't a bigger deal after starring in Just One of the Guys. A lot of critics attack this movie for not having any heart to it, but I feel just the opposite. Specifically the scene where Tony opens up to Jackie. I realize that some people will think that this scene is tacky, cheesy, whatever, I get it. But it's always worked for me. Same with the scene where Tony's trying to own the moment, kissing Laura at the end of Satan's Alley's first act. At least from my perspective, that wasn't about Tony trying to win her over, or his still having feelings for her. I think he moved on when he left her Christmas party and ventured off back to his old stomping grounds. Rather, I've always seen it as Tony being caught up in the moment, having all that energy, letting everyone know that he's made it, similar to his solo dance to close out the show. In doing research for this and reading comments over the years, I think people generally dislike the movie's soundtrack. Surprise, surprise, but I happen to like it. I'm also a sucker for that late 70s, early 80s sound, and I'm not sure how to categorize it, but it's that type of sound that might pop up in a lot of rom-coms during that period. I'm thinking Michael McDonald, Robbie Dupre, Kenny Loggins, Eric Carmen, Seals and Crofts, Joe Esposito of Brooklyn Dreams, who helped out with 4 songs for the movie, though only 2 made the soundtrack. The Bee Gees' Someone Belonging to Someone and Moody Girl, sung by Frank Stallone, stand out the most, that is, other than Far From Over, which is a great song to lead in with. And of course, the Bee Gees' Staying Alive was the perfect song to wrap things up with Tony strutting, coming full circle to how it was used as the intro to Saturday Night Fever. In closing, what bothers me isn't so much that the critics didn't like it in 1983, it's that various other critics over the years, in my opinion, piggybacked on some of the earliest reviews and just repeated what they had read. I think if someone wants to do a very safe review, they'll just trash Staying Alive and say that it's completely unwatchable. It's easy to pile on at this point. On the other end of the spectrum, I really like Pulp Fiction, to be clear, but whenever I hear people going on and on about how brilliant it is, I'm not buying that either. It's not exactly a film made for everyone. I felt the same way about Magnolia in '99, where so many people I knew were going on about how amazing it was. There's nothing in that story going over people's heads with Magnolia? Honestly? I really don't think Staying Alive is a 0% movie. I get it if it's a 20%, or dare I say, a 55% approval rating, falling somewhere within that range, but a clear 0%? For the record, I acknowledge that Saturday Night Fever is clearly a better movie, and certainly a more important one. In fact, I find something I like about it more and more with each viewing, and I would rank it higher than Staying Alive on my all-time favorite movies list. Conversely, even though I'm well aware of all the flaws that Staying Alive has, those flaws haven't ruined it for me. I still enjoy watching it, and I likely still will years from now.